Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening and welcome along once more to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight I'll be asking whether or not it's a good idea or even morally right to vaccinate children as young as 5 years old. I'll be taking another look at Canada and the defiance of the truckers in the face of attempts by government forces there to remove them. And later I'll be learning about the rescue of 4 lions born in captivity but now set free into the wild where they belong. All of that and more, but first here are the headlines from Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you. Good evening. These are the latest headlines in the GB newsroom. Top Ukrainian military officials have reportedly come under fire in the east of the country. New video shows lawmakers, soldiers and foreign journalists running from what appears to be shelling in the Donetsk region. The group was on a tour of the conflict zone when the attack happened. They were taken to a bomb shelter. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has confirmed it successfully launched hypersonic and cruise missiles at sea and land-based targets as part of nuclear drills. The military exercise was overseen by President Vladimir Putin and the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. The Ukraine crisis has dominated the agenda at the Munich Security Conference. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned the world can't underestimate what's at stake if Russia invades Ukraine. He told the conference it's vital that any violent act of aggression by President Putin fails.
After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose.
Back in the UK, more bad weather is set to hit, with forecasters warning winds of up to 70 miles per hour are expected over the next couple of days. Thousands of homes are still without power after Storm Eunice swept across the country yesterday, with insurers saying the clean-up bill could exceed £300 million. Record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people, damaged buildings and brought down trees, blocking routes across the rail network. Rescuers in Greece are searching for 12 people who are still missing after a ferry fire. The vessel was sailing to Italy when the blaze started in the early hours of yesterday morning. 280 passengers and staff were rescued. In Canada, police are using pepper spray and stun grenades to clear protesters from the capital, Ottawa. Demonstrators were pushed back after a 3-week blockade against vaccine mandates for lorry drivers. More than 100 people were arrested yesterday. And Team GB has finally won a medal at the Winter Olympics, with the men's curling team taking silver. They lost to Sweden 5-4 in a nail-biting final in Beijing. The women's team is also in the final. They face Japan early tomorrow. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver Live.
Sometimes I wonder if I'm paranoid. Sometimes I wonder if being paranoid isn't a good thing in these troubling times. Pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson, the maker of one of the COVID-19 vaccines, is facing thousands of lawsuits in the US from people claiming its baby powder caused their cancer. For decades, according to a Reuters news agency investigation, Johnson & Johnson knew the product was sometimes contaminated with asbestos, a substance that can cause cancer. But the company kept that information from industry regulators and the public. This week, Reuters claimed Johnson & Johnson had also investigated the option of shifting the liability from the lawsuits to a separate, newly created subsidiary company which could declare bankruptcy and so limit the impact of any damages resulting from the lawsuits. Long before the baby powder lawsuits, Johnson & Johnson had faced other legal actions alleging harm caused by other products. As I said at the beginning, Johnson & Johnson is the company behind one of the COVID-19 vaccines, and millions of doses of their offering have been injected into millions of people. Carcinogenic asbestos in baby powder. Plans to offload the problem to a subsidiary company so as to declare bankruptcy and limit the hit from any damages. A history of seeking to keep from the general public unfavourable information about their products. Some people are suspicious about the safety of a vaccine from the same company. It's important to stress this is not just about Johnson & Johnson, far from it. Many people are hesitant, at least, about all of the vaccines pushed by all of Big Pharma. 2 years ago, I had barely heard of Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca and others. Now their names are as familiar as those of characters from the movies. Across the world, governments have accepted indemnity so that companies producing the vaccines don't have to pay compensation in the event of any harm done. And yet, people hesitant about vaccine safety are dismissed and vilified as swivel-eyed, tin hat-wearing conspiracy theorists. Just being hesitant about vaccine safety and asking questions about products destined for their bodies, for wanting to wait and see what long-term research might reveal, reasonable people are made targets for shame and abuse, sacked from their jobs, lives ruined. Careful now, people will say we are paranoid. The European Medicines Agency is investigating reports of changes to women's menstrual cycles attributed to the vaccines and suggestions of associated effects on fertility. No one can yet know the truth of it, and yet scarcely has the topic even surfaced on mainstream media. Paranoia, that's all it is apparently. Paranoia, pure and simple. It's useful to know that in the USA, once a government accepts a vaccine for use for all children, and it must be all children, then that country's government accepts in perpetuity, which is to say forever, all liability for the consequent effects, good or ill, of that vaccine. From that moment on, the moment when the needles go into the arms of babies, the companies producing those products are off the hook, and not just in relation to effects on children, but for effects on recipients of every age. Paranoid? Moi. Pfizer, another of those companies behind another of the vaccines, has been testing the efficacy of 2 doses in babies aged from 6 months old to 5 years. It appears 2 jabs is not enough, however. Now, according to the New York Times, they are assessing the efficacy of 3 doses administered to the same age group. In March, the first 10,000 pages of Pfizer's data relating to their vaccine are due for release in the US by the Federal Drug Administration, despite the company having gone back to court twice in hopes of blocking release of said information. Round and round and round we go. Where she stops, nobody knows. According to the Evening Times newspaper in Glasgow, Public Health Scotland is to stop publishing data on COVID deaths and hospitalisations by vaccine status over concerns such information is misrepresented, and I quote, by anti-vax campaigners, close quote. Let's have a look at the facts, shall we? The facts the Scottish Government would prefer were not published. During the 4 weeks up until February the 4th this year, 478 Scots died and had COVID registered on their death certificates. Of them, checks notes, 417 out of the 478 had been fully vaccinated. Let us be clear, as we do like to say these days, 87% of those that died of or with COVID in Scotland in the 4 weeks until the 4th of February were vaccinated. But the Scottish Government would prefer you didn't linger over that thought, far less contemplate any significance it might have in the long, murky story of this present emergency, now 2 years old and counting. 3 weeks to flatten the curve, save our NHS, we're all in it together. But that's plainly enough of that. No more such data are to be offered up for public consumption, lest they be, and I quote again, misrepresented by anti-vax campaigners. And then there's Canada, poor old Canada, that is home to family and friends of many of us. The increasingly puffy and pasty Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, looking more and more like a waxwork dummy left too close to a radiator, has clutched desperately, drowning man that he surely is, at emergency powers. He evidently fears the truckers and their wives and their little ones and their freedom protest, and so feels as vulnerable as a sandcastle facing the incoming tide. His dad, Pierre, invoked similar powers, but in the old man's case, it was in the face of actual terrorists who, among other things, had kidnapped politicians in pursuit of an independent socialist state of Quebec. Pity Justin, he of the B-movie actor looks, has taken up the same authoritarian stick, empowering himself to do whatever he wants in order to get his own way, in the face of families minded to put up bouncy castles, to offer free food for the people of Ottawa, and to invite them to relax in pop-up saunas. Protesters politely asking for the return of their rights, the right to go to the cinema with their kids, to go out to a restaurant, to earn a living, all without a mandated vaccination, are seen softly singing the Canadian national anthem. But a politician with a taste for blackface called them racists and fascists. His police stole their food and fuel. In the past hours, his myrmidons have trampled people, including a woman on a mobility scooter, under the hooves of their heavy horses. Lesser Trudeau has gone to war against peaceful men, women and children, and also dogs. US media are reporting that if you're a trucker defying his will, your pets will be seized and, quote, relinquished after 8 days, which is being interpreted as plans to put those animals down. All of this is happening right now in Canada, our sister nation, and yet word of condemnation from any of our leaders on this side of the Atlantic, including Boris Johnson, comes there none. I suspect this is because they are, all of them, Johnson, Macron, Ardern and more, cut from the same bolt of cloth and waiting to see how brother Trudeau gets on. There is, shamefully, precious little coverage of the violent suppression of Canadian people on any legacy media. 3 weeks to flatten the curve, we were told, 2 summers and 1,000 years ago. Now it's time to trample peaceful protesters and take their dogs. Trudeau is freezing citizens' bank accounts too, helping himself to control of the hard-earned cash of freedom-loving people. And yet while Trudeau does what he likes, the leaders of the West remain silent, diverting attention elsewhere, to Ukraine, for instance. Canada has metamorphosed into something between a banana republic and a totalitarian regime on our leaders' watch, and none has raised so much as an eyebrow. Shame on Justin Trudeau, spoiled brat, and shame on the rest of them. People ought not to fear the power of governments. Governments ought to fear the power, the righteous power of their people. It's all about a virus, apparently. A virus causing an illness from which almost everyone recovers. A virus whose victims are, on average, over 82 years old, older than average life expectancy. Let us never ever forget that fact from which all else has grown like poisonous weeds. It's for the greater good, we're told. We're all in it together, we're told. Now hand over your wallet and your dog and kneel down with your hands behind your back. One day you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. In Austria, it's illegal to refuse the vaccines. Ruinous fines are in play there for those protecting bodily autonomy. In Germany, Italy, Greece, France and other European countries, the lives of the unvaccinated are being made increasingly impossible. The lives of the vaccinated are hardly what they once were either. And don't let's get started on the prison islands of Australia and New Zealand. Clap for carers, they said. 15 million jabs to freedom, they said. It feels like we blinked then, and suddenly it was sack the filthy vax dodgers, except, oh wait, let's not, for now. In Canada, it's accept the mandate or we'll freeze your bank account. You'll lose your dog and we'll trample you under the hooves of horses because of a respiratory virus from which almost everyone recovers. So here's the thing that haunts me, that I won't drop and that won't go away. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Now, joining me in the studio, I have writer and education specialist Tom Buick. Good evening, Tom. And political commentator Emily Carver. How are you both?
I'm very well. That was quite the monologue.
Emily, on the subject of my monologue, what do you make of Canada as of the last few hours?
Well, it's quite extraordinary what's been happening over there. And as you mentioned, the lack of scrutiny coming from other Western governments. Our own very much seems to have, ignored the story. I don't believe the Prime Minister has said anything. We've seen some Conservative MPs, some other backbenchers, mentioning it on their Twitter feeds and so on. But we should really be experiencing mass outrage at this story. I feel so bad for those in Canada who are under what has become a tyrannical regime, more or less. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that a supposedly liberal leader like Trudeau, who was, a pin-up of the woke left, just as Jacinda Ardern was, can become such a tyrant under pressure, when he comes under an ounce of pressure, and he's proven himself to be quite a weak man.
Tom, I watched the clip of Boris Johnson there saying that we can't underestimate what's at stake in Ukraine. I would say we can't underestimate what's at stake in Canada. Why would you imagine that he's prepared to worry about the freedoms and rights of the people of Ukraine while what is happening in Canada is also on his watch?
At its most basic level, it's political hypocrisy, isn't it? It's the a la carte sort of menu approach to when to intervene when you see something that's not quite right in the world. I mean, I look at what's going on in Canada, Neil, and personally I weep because it was the country that I went to, and I left school with not very many qualifications initially, and I got a job working on a community project in northern Alberta for a year. It's the most amazing country. It has a Westminster-style government, yet we have, as you say, a very, a leader of a liberal party that's propped up actually by a centre-left New Democratic Party. And of course, we've got these latest scenes that we're seeing coming from Ottawa, and no parliamentary vote has actually taken place on these extraordinary powers that Trudeau has taken, and that should be called out. I think Western democracies, whether it's NATO fighting against authoritarians like Putin, ought to equally hold the mirror up to themselves in terms of how they're treating their own publics and ask serious questions as well.
Also, it does show just how fragile our liberal democracies are.
Yeah.
I mean, these are emergency powers that the Canadian government is using. They have a written constitution that is there to protect civil liberties, the rights of their citizens, and they were able to bring in emergency legislation and then, I believe yesterday, avoid scrutiny of what the government was doing with those powers. And it just shows that, we talk about Western liberal democracy and how it's a beacon of hope around the world for those who want to, copy what we have over here. But it does show that they're rather fragile, and it is quite extraordinary. Of course, what's happening in Ukraine is of major concern to Europe and also to the United States. But this should be very much of equal, if not more, consideration. Because I mean, I've been skiing in Canada, and the people are so happy and jolly and friendly and all that. And then you see a clip on Twitter of a man being harassed and pushed to the ground by officers at the bottom of a ski lift because he wasn't wearing a mask outdoors. I mean, this isn't about public health.
That is right. Yeah. Well, I would contend. Tom, what do you think? You have to keep on telling yourself that all of this came from an outbreak of a virus with a 99-point-something% recovery rate for almost across the board. And yet, in 2 years, it's freezing bank accounts, trampling people with horses, mandated vaccines, and the rest of it. I mean, is it a public health issue, or was it always about something else?
Well, it started as a public health issue back in March 2020, obviously originated in Wuhan in China. We saw how the Italians really in mainland Europe were the first sort of government to go for the, if you like, the Chinese model. And then, our political leaders, I think, looked at that and said, well, doesn't seem to be too much objection to quite authoritarian mandates being brought in. So that's the model that we followed in lockdown 1, and of course we've had these progressive lockdowns. But, you know, I mean, you talk about being paranoid. I mean, I just shake my head sometimes in wonderment, because I look at, you know, the kinds of measures that have been brought in, and I'm reminded of what George Orwell famously said about, you know, these issues are not so much between left and right, they're between authoritarians and libertarians. And as someone that has, you know, traditionally grown up on the left of politics, what I find extraordinary is to see so-called centre-left progressive politicians have turned out to be the most authoritarian. We've seen it in New Zealand, we've seen it with some of the state governments in Australia, and also in now in Canada. And that just begs the question, also, what is going on the left of politics in the Western world, when suddenly authoritarian measures and policies seem to be de rigueur?
But it's a reminder of the dangers of collectivism. And there are those on the left who are more individualist, there are those on the right who are, and we see how governments are able to justify all sorts for the greater good or for the will of the people and so on. And actually we forget the individual, and that's what's happened. People won't stand up for the rights of people to do something that they don't agree with.
I wonder, actually, you know, you said it's about it's now about libertarians and authoritarians. I wonder if it isn't just about right and wrong. You know, I think all of us have an innate understanding and sense of what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
And what's happening in Canada is wrong. It's not about it's not about left and right, authoritarian and liberal. It's wrong.
Yeah, because
you can justify it though if you believe that it's for the greater good.
Yeah.
But who defines the greater good at any given moment?
Seemingly, it's our politicians and what you would call, I guess, the liberal elite, or what was.
We'll have to move on, although we can come back to some of these topics later in the show. After the break, the government announced this week that England will offer COVID jabs to 5 to 11-year-olds, and we will be debating whether that's the right way to go.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking a little drier and calmer, but only for a short while. Let's take a look at the details. Cloud will already begin to increase across southwest England this evening, with outbreaks of rain developing, winds easing for a few hours. Mild this evening with temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius. It will be drier this evening across the southeast and London, with the winds easing too, temperatures falling away over the coming hours. Over to Wales, and after a quiet few hours, cloud and rain will begin to move back in from the west. Winds will also increase. Turning chilly for a time this evening across the Midlands, with clear skies over Birmingham. Winds will fall light ahead of more unsettled weather moving in tonight. Temperatures hovering around 4 degrees Celsius. Any lingering rain, sleet and snow will soon clear away from northern England to leave a dry evening. Temperatures tumbling, with some patchy frost and ice forming ahead of further rain tonight. Frost and ice also for a time across eastern Scotland, whilst in the west we could see cloud and rain beginning to move in from the Atlantic. Winds also increasing along the coasts. Turning increasingly wet across Northern Ireland this evening, with Belfast holding on to the driest weather for longest. Winds increasing from the west too, but staying on the mild side. Wet and windy weather with then sweep across the whole country as we go through tonight. Gales developing by morning, and that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, children aged between 5 and 11 in England will be offered a low-dose COVID vaccine. Science experts say the decision would help protect the very small number of children who become seriously ill with COVID. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the rollout will be non-urgent with an emphasis on parental choice. Northern Ireland said on Wednesday it will follow England and offer jabs to 5 to 11-year-olds. Wales and Scotland are already offering young children the vaccine. Joining me now is Dr. Bharat Pankania, who is a clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter's College of Medicine and Health, and also Tony Hinton, who is a retired surgeon. Good evening, both. Thanks for joining me.
Good evening, Neil.
Dr. Pankania, if I can come to you first. Is the British government right to offer vaccinations to children of this age in England?
Yes.
And can you elaborate on why? Is there evidence that this is necessary?
Well, if you look at the evidence, there's plenty of it, which is prevention is better than experimenting with getting a infection and then immunity. Prevention works, prevention is safer, prevention is a measured, calculated intervention, and we've done this many times in many other places. And of course, if you look at the evidence from eminent scientists, United States, Canada, European Union, Israel, they're all doing the same. The United Kingdom has been out of step for a long time.
But there are eminent scientists in the countries that you mentioned and elsewhere who counter and say no, that it's not the appropriate course of action. And you also say that the vaccines are safe for those young children when, if it's been said before and it's probably worth saying again, there is and can't be, for understandable reasons, no long-term data about what will be the impact on children as they live out the rest of their lives. On that basis, given that Omicron poses such a marginal threat to those children, why take the risk and give them something with risks associated with it in the form of the vaccine?
We're not taking risks, we're giving them a measured intervention, which is primary prevention via the vaccine route. That is what we're doing. And by now, many billions of doses of the vaccines have been given, albeit to older age groups as well. And we know by far and large, the vaccines do what they do, and they are safe, and they are safer than experimenting or hoping that all will be well via the infection route.
Dr. Pankania, we've just got some problems with your sound at the moment. So if you bear with me, I'll go to Dr. Tony Hinton just while we amend that situation. Tony, good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
Is this just about the government being cautious in offering these vaccinations to children in this age group?
Well, there's two things I would say about the information that the JCVI have put out. The first thing is, of course, is they haven't actually recommended it. They've made an open, non-urgent offer to parents. Now, that's a very strange wording. It's almost as if they're saying, if there are problems, don't come back complaining to us because we didn't recommend it. Now, the other thing that the JCVI put out is they put out some data that said for every million injections, there would be 3 cases prevented from going to ITU. And for every million doses, there would be perhaps 2 cases of myocarditis. So the cases prevented from going to ITU slightly outweighed the possible cases of myocarditis. But of course, those figures are incorrect, because if we look at what we're planning to do, potentially 100% of 5.6 million children may get vaccinated. But there are only about 15% of that age group left that do not already have immunity. So they will not catch COVID badly enough to go to ITU at all. So the figures are totally skewed. In fact, if this vaccine goes ahead, it will be much more likely for children to get myocarditis than to end up in hospital because of COVID. And Omicron, of course, changes everything. I've been banging on about Omicron as the vaccine we've been waiting for the last 2 months. And finally, yesterday, none other than Bill Gates, and I'll just read his quote, said, "The virus itself, particularly the variant Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines." That's Bill Gates. I'm quite happy to agree with Bill Gates on that one.
In this, on the basis of what you're saying, though, why are we offering it to children when one of the key arguments seems to be that it protects adults if the children in their vicinity, in their environment, are protected also? What is the medical consensus about that as an approach? To vaccinate children in the hope of protecting other people, not them.
Well, there is various data on that looking back, and there wasn't any strong data that children are disease spreaders. And in fact, for instance, if we look at teachers have a lower rate of catching COVID and having bad issues with COVID than the general population. Now, if children were these super spreaders, you would expect teachers to be particularly badly affected. But again, Omicron completely changes everything. All 3 of us in this discussion this evening, I'm sure, know people that have had 2 vaccines or have even had the booster as well and have still caught Omicron. Everyone will catch Omicron. So by vaccinating children, you will not stop them catching Omicron. There are very few left that aren't immune already, but Omicron really is the only vaccine that we now need. It ends this pandemic.
Bear with me, Tony. I'm just going to offer this up to my guests in the studio with me as well. Tom, you're a parent. How do you feel about vaccination for children in general, given what Dr. Tony Hinton is saying about, Omicron? So many people by now, after 2 years, have encountered the virus, built up immunity to it. I know you're not a medical person.
I'm not. I'm a parent with 3 children eligible under the age of 17 for the vaccine, but I'm also a middle-aged man in my 50s who has been double jabbed, absolutely believe in the efficacy of the vaccine for someone of my age, not because there's any underlying illness or I'm immunosuppressed, but the data, I think, has shown very clearly over the last 18 months, and there's a lot of data out there now, and actually people can Google this data very easily. You can see that the prevalence of the vaccine for older people has broken the link between hospitalisations and deaths. And the point about Omicron, of course, being a milder variant, also has helped us come out of this sort of 3rd wave relatively unscathed. But on the point about children, going back to the data, the Office for National Statistics has showed that there's less than 11 children that have died from COVID since the start of the pandemic. Now, they're obviously 11 tragic stories, parents who will be heartbroken by the news, but of course the data doesn't tell you whether they were immunosuppressed, whether there are other clinical risks. So I think this term non-urgent is quite important, because I think parents will look at that and say, well, how urgent then is it for me to get my very healthy children vaccinated?
Emily, the government has said that it has a duty to protect all of society, not just segments of society. Would you say, be justification for offering this vaccination to children who there's a great deal of debate about whether or not they need it?
I mean, I'm not sure the government does have a duty to protect all of us in society besides from foreign invasion. I don't think that is the role of government, and I think we need to move towards a society where we don't rely on the government for absolutely everything. So I'd quite like to change the relationship between the individual and the state, because I think it's just got ridiculously paternalistic at this stage. I mean, with the storms, I wouldn't be surprised if people had, taken a lockdown mandate on that basis, as well as this. We've become very fearful as a country in some ways, and also we welcome paternalism. I do think that parents should be free to decide whether they vaccinate their children. Ultimately, it should be up to them. But I do think that the question to ask is, why is it being pushed so much? I mean, just listening to the doctor there, it's clear that children aren't at risk of this virus. It may well be that they're more at risk of the side effects of the vaccine. So I'm wondering, what is this about? Is it money? Is it a wrong sense of public health? What is it about?
Now, I think we do have Dr. Bharat Pankhania back, although not in vision. We have him via just a straightforward phone connection. Dr. Pankhania, I'm hoping you were listening to some of that, or that you were able to hear some of that. What Dr. Hinton was saying before we lost you about the advent of Omicron, and even the likes of Bill Gates acknowledging, he seemed to acknowledge that it was as good or better than the vaccine. In the light of Omicron, what is the evidence that we still need the vaccination for children?
So I didn't hear everything, but if you are telling me that as Omicron is mild, therefore we don't need a vaccine, is that the line of thinking?
Well, I think Dr. Tony Hinton was suggesting that it worked in the same way, or it provided protection in the manner of a vaccination, in that it encouraged the body to produce the immunity or the defences or the antibodies, and negated, therefore, the necessity to double up with the vaccination on top.
Look, vaccines protect and vaccines provide cross-immunity. So the vaccines were developed well before Omicron arrived, and we find to our luck that although it is not perfect, there is cross-immunity and there is protection from Omicron as well as Delta, as well as the other variants. The issue is that with a vaccine, you are getting a measured dose of something that's going to provide you with protection, compared to taking the gamble of being exposed to a virus and you don't know how your body will react to it. You know, you may get a mild infection, all well and good. You might not get a mild infection, and you may go on to have long COVID. So there are several issues whereby you have the one alternative, which is get infected, or the other one is have a measured intervention which will protect you and save you an illness, save you transmitting, save you causing other cases, and hopefully also prevent long COVID. What would you do? Protection via the vaccine route.
But Dr. Hinton was saying that Omicron will reach everyone. His words, that it's of a transmissible nature, such that we would expect that the vast majority of people encounter it. And he was also pointing out that even those in the wider population who've been double and triple jabbed are contracting Omicron. So yes, presumably the children who receive the vaccination have either already had Omicron or will still go on to get Omicron, because the vaccine doesn't seem to stop infection with that variant. So I'm looking to clarify what advantage the children themselves get. Whether or not them being vaccinated is protection for the rest of society, what's in it for the kids?
Okay. Let me start from the beginning, if I may. So, if you are not immunized at all and you haven't encountered a virus, a number of variables come into play. You may have a mild infection and recover from it, all is well and good. On the other hand, you may get a severe illness, you may go on to develop long COVID, we don't know. On the other hand, if you have been immunized and you encounter Omicron, milder illness. Chances of developing long COVID, less so. Chances of being infectious for a shorter number of days, much more so. Chances of releasing lots of virus particles if you are immunized, a lot fewer. So what I am trying to say to you is there is protection, there is benefit from being immunized for the person as well as for the community. And we always work on those two dimensions. There is benefit to the person, there is benefit to the community.
We're running out of time on this always fascinating debate. Dr. Barak Pankania, thank you for your time. Dr. Tony Hinton, who I think is in a skiing chalet in Switzerland, thank you for your time. It's a conversation that just runs and runs, isn't it? In my simple understanding of vaccination is that it stops you contracting the disease in question. And since these vaccines neither seem to stop you catching it nor transmitting it, I remain in a state of confusion as to what these vaccines are actually for. Nonetheless, we'll talk about it again, I'm sure. OK, fancy buying your very own beach? We will meet the man who has one for sale.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, when I say extremely rare opportunity, it could mean anything, right? Well, I'm going to say there's an extremely rare opportunity to buy a private beach. I have to say, I mean, surely that's something that must appeal to most of us, owning your own stretch of coastline. Well, there's a stretch going up for sale in Inglemells in Lincolnshire, and it's being sold by Simon Adlerley, and he joins us now. Simon, good evening.
Good evening to you.
I've long been associated with the coast. I've walked many, many miles of beaches, and I'm drawn instinctively. Tell us about your own patch of heaven.
Well, I guess I was really fortunate. About 16 years ago, I had the opportunity to buy some beach. It was quite a large piece, 3.5 miles long at the time. And all in all, it's been an amazing experience. I have a real affinity with the coastline and the wildlife and the nature, and it's been a marvellous thing.
Do you have, do you have a house on the beach? Do you have accommodation there? Tell us about it.
No, I live close to the beach, but we can't develop here because of the flood risks. We wouldn't be allowed to. So it's really, what's up for sale now is just a wild and windswept and just beautiful to see the way nature's developing.
How does it feel? You're looking at pictures there, that vast expanse. You're talking about 3.5 miles, so it disappears out of sight. To what extent can a person really feel that they own that, or do you sometimes not just feel that it owns you?
I've always had immense pleasure from seeing other people just enjoying the space. And, we are selling these sections off, but we're really picky about the people we're selling them to. We've had people come to us basically with open checkbooks saying they want to buy, but the people with the most money aren't necessarily the right custodians for this. So we're working hard to find the right people to buy this, and we've had some lovely stories.
So, tell us, for instance, when people come to be, interviewed, as it were, as potential buyers, what do you ask of them, and what kind of stories have you heard in return?
Well, one of the sections of beaches that we have allocated, a lady sent me an email which was very emotional. Basically, she was a teacher, her husband was a teacher. Unfortunately, he passed away, and he was a geography teacher, loved the wildlife and the coast, left 2 daughters, 11 and 13, and they just wanted to have something in his memory that was really unique, and we allotted them one of our plots.
I always feel about the beach, wherever you are, that it's the most dynamic environment that we have, in that it changes with every wave that breaks. Every wavelet that touches it draws something else on the surface that will only briefly be there, and then it will be gone. I have to ask, how can you bear to give up your own stretch? Will you not miss it dreadfully?
I shall be retaining some for myself. Just a smaller, more manageable piece, just so that I have got my own private space to go to. Because a lot of people get serenity. They go to the beach. It's a great place to have, just to clear your head. And yeah, it's just a lovely place to be. And of course, the fluidness of the beach and the nature and the tides and the wavelets and the pools that's left and the storms, the way they change, everything changes. I've been up there every day for the past 10 days, and every day has been different. And it's magical to see nature really working in unison.
Now, as it stands, you have that 3.5 miles. You have it in its entirety. What will you miss? When in the future, when you're somewhere else and you close your eyes and think about the beach that you had, what do you think will be the image or the thought or the feeling that comes back?
Or certainly these outlying parcels that we're giving people an opportunity to own, they've been nothing but joy, because there's been no issues at all. In some areas where we have more commercial activity, one of the things that I look back on is the disappointment of the way that people treat beaches. The trash they leave, the disrespect that they so many people just don't respect beaches. And I won't miss that, I must admit.
I completely agree with you that the extent to which that this nest in which we live is routinely and thoughtlessly defiled and disrespected by those that should be thanking their lucky stars that they have access to such places never ceases never ceases to surprise and to disappoint. You know, it's a lovely story, Simon. Thanks very much for making time with us this evening and for giving us all that glimpse. Whether any of us manages to buy some of that beach or not, you know, at least we've had the opportunity to glimpse it and to dream about what might have been. So thank you very much, Simon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Are you attracted by the thought, Emily, of your own private beach?
Yeah, I mean, why not? Unfortunately, I haven't got a spare 50k going at the moment, so it might be in the future.
I find the whole idea that there are even private beaches on Shakespeare's Sceptred Isle totally repulsive.
I really
right,
do,
okay. Because I think if there's one part of our natural habitat, never mind, you know, the public thoroughfares that we've got. But, you know, beaches for me should be completely under common ownership.
But someone has to take responsibility for them. I mean, Simon's talking about the mess, and you can imagine from time to time what's been there. And if it's owned by everyone, then everyone just imagines that somebody else is taking care of it.
Then, by all means, Neil, parcel them up. I mean, we have the National Trust in this country, you know, non-profit organisations, volunteers who will be custodians of a 3.5 miles of beach. I think, for me, the idea of owning a private beach in Britain as a status symbol.
But private owners can look after land very nicely.
Yeah.
And this man clearly wants it to be handed over to someone who's going to be a good custodian. Also, if you go on holiday, all of those beaches are chopped up into private beaches. Does that hurt your feelings?
It has hurt my feelings because I'm, you know, with my kids and I want to be able to take them to a landmark. And I'm told by a 5-star franchise I can't take them.
I think you're imagining a utopia. I have to say, I think if those places, if all places were just all owned communally, then everyone would just assume that somebody else was responsible for them and taking care of them.
It'd be a socialist hellhole. You'd have people just like living on the beach, and it would just be a total mess.
Do you honestly think that these places would be cared for if no one was actually held up as and identified as the responsible owner?
Yeah, because we know through our history, the 1946 Wildlife and Countryside Act that brought these national parks into being, that for the first time gave working class people working in pretty, you know, desperate mill towns, you know, these sort of dark satanic mills as they were referred to, could go out and get fresh air into their lungs. For me, you know, I just like the idea that if you live in Britain, you could join a beach, a piece of coastline, and you could walk and walk and walk, and there wouldn't be a single landowner who would come and say, "You're walking on my land."
I don't think Simon's proposing that he's ever kept anybody away. I wouldn't be planning on anyone putting up fences.
He's a benevolent
that's good to know.
In any
landowner.
event, I can't see in my immediate future. I can't really see any likelihood of my acquiring a private beach. It will, and I'm sure always be just a fantasy. But I can dream. A chap can dream. My panel are going to stay here with me, Emily and Tom, and we'll have lots more to talk about. But we've got a break coming up. After that break, we will be meeting this week's Great Britain. And the story of this Great Britain is wonderful. I'll see you after the break.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking a little drier and calmer, but only for a short while. Let's take a look at the details. Cloud will already begin to increase across southwest England this evening, with outbreaks of rain developing, winds easing for a few hours. Mild this evening with temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius. It will be drier this evening across the southeast and London, with the winds easing too, temperatures falling away over the coming hours. Over to Wales, and after a quiet few hours, cloud and rain will begin to move back in from the west. Winds will also increase. Turning chilly for a time this evening across the Midlands, with clear skies over Birmingham. Winds will fall light ahead of more unsettled weather moving in tonight. Temperatures hovering around 4 degrees Celsius. Any lingering rain, sleet and snow will soon clear away from northern England to leave a dry evening. Temperatures tumbling, with some patchy frost and ice forming ahead of further rain tonight. Frost and ice also for a time across eastern Scotland, whilst in the west we could see cloud and rain beginning to move in from the Atlantic. Winds also increasing along the coasts. Turning increasingly wet across Northern Ireland this evening, with Belfast holding on to the driest weather for longest. Winds increasing from the west too, but staying on the mild side. Wet and windy weather with then sweep across the whole country as we go through tonight. Gales developing by morning, and that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, we were supposed to be going across to talk to our Great Britain, but we're having some difficulties connecting with her. I think I should probably tell you the story. As you maybe know, if you're a regular viewer, we scour the country trying to find those who in their own way do something to make the world around them a slightly better place, and we call those people Great Britons. In the case of tonight's Great Britain, Debbie Lewis is her name, and she has raised £20,000 for her local hospice, which is St Benedict's Hospice in Ryhope, which is in Sunderland. She's a grandmother, and she was going to tell us all about it, but the frustration of technology, we don't have her with us. So I'm going to come to my panel. Tom, the Great Britain section, I find that in these times above all others, we need, don't we, to have stories in our lives which lift our heads above the clouds and let us see the light.
Yeah, and congratulations to Debbie, whether she's watching digitally or on Skype or any other medium. You're right, Neil. I mean, it's one of the frustrations I have to say every year when I see, who's been honoured. Not that there are some great people that get gongs and are being honoured, but actually you see in your own community people who are going above and beyond. They're raising money, they're caring for people, often doing busy day jobs and then going and caring for people. And why is it these are not the people then you see in print in New Year's honours and Queen's birthday honours? It's just civil servants usually.
We so often, and tonight would have been another example, that fundraising around a hospice, and it was connected to loss. And going into these stories, you expect them to be only sad, and there's undoubtedly sadness within them. But miraculously, they invariably turn out to be the most uplifting stories because in extremis, something else is brought out of the human spirit.
Well, yeah, and sad stories always bring out a number of emotions, not just sadness alone. I imagine this woman has many stories to tell.
Hold on, I think we have Debbie. I think by the wonders of technology. Debbie, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, Debbie, hello. I'm so glad that I wasn't just going to have to tell your story on your behalf. While we've got you, I'll cut to the chase to make sure we get the heart of the story from you, and it is a story with a heart. Tell me about the hospice and how you became involved in fundraising for that place.
Well, my late husband was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer in October of 2017. And in the May, he was a grafter, what they call a worker, and he wasn't going to be able to do a journey. So I went to Blackpool with all the girls, and he was nicknamed the Bear, as well as a lot of other nicknames he had. One of them being Skinny, but he was quite a large gentleman, so it was like taking the water, really. And I bought him a bear, and I named it Captain Skinvincible. And what my plan was to send him on a journey, what Lee could unfortunately not do. So I'd said I would raise money as well. So I asked my husband who we wanted us to raise the money for, and he chose St. Benedict's. He didn't actually stay in St. Benedict's Hospice, but he had a few visits. But the palliative care team were absolutely amazing. He called them his secret angels, and I'll be indebted to the rest of my life. So that's when I continued to fundraise for the hospice.
And you've raised £20,000, and you're still raising more. So you're still continuing your connection.
Yeah, we've raised. December, our total was just over 3 years, £20,951. And that's in the 3 year. But my husband died in September of 2018. We've basically done it since then. But my granddaughter was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy type 1.
Once again, Debbie, thank you so much. Debbie was going to say that the fundraising goes on because a further effort is needed in connection with our granddaughter. But there we go. Technology is denying us the rest of that story. There's a lot more to come in the next hour. But now we go once again to Olivia Guthrie for the news.
Good evening. Here are the latest headlines in the GB newsroom. Top Ukrainian military officials have reportedly come under fire in the east of the country. New video shows lawmakers, soldiers and foreign journalists running from what appears to be shelling in the Donetsk region. The group was on a tour of the conflict zone when the attack happened. They were taken to a bomb shelter. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has confirmed it successfully launched hypersonic and cruise missiles at sea and land-based targets as part of nuclear drills. The military exercise was overseen by President Vladimir Putin and the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Well, the Ukrainian crisis has been dominating the agenda at the Munich Security Conference. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned the world can't underestimate what's at stake if Russia invades Ukraine. He told the conference it's vital that any violent act of aggression by President Putin fails.
After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose.
In other news, more bad weather is set to hit the UK, with forecasters warning winds of up to 70 miles an hour are expected over the next couple of days. Thousands of homes are still without power after Storm Eunice swept across the country yesterday, with insurers saying the clean-up bill could exceed £300 million. Record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people, damaged buildings and brought down trees, blocking routes across the rail network. Rescuers in Greece are searching for 12 people who are still missing after a ferry fire. The vessel was sailing to Italy when the blaze started in the early hours of yesterday morning. 280 passengers and staff were rescued. In Canada, police are using pepper spray and stun grenades to clear protesters from the capital, Ottawa. Demonstrators were pushed back after a 3-week blockade against vaccine mandates for lorry drivers. More than 100 people were arrested yesterday. And Team GB has finally won a medal at the Winter Olympics, with the men's curling team taking silver. They lost to Sweden 5-4 in a nail-biting final in Beijing. The women's team is also in the final. They face Japan early tomorrow. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver.
Welcome back. Thanks for that, Olivia. Now, Maajid Nawaz was accused of tweeting, and I'm quoting here, deranged rubbish, close quotes, about vaccines after he queried the use of the booster jab. Now he's gone further by questioning so-called COVID mandates. And I'm pleased to say that Maajid Nawaz joins us now. Good evening.
Evening, Neil. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm delighted that you're here. Now, it's such an inflammatory subject, isn't it? And there's a lot of passions running very high. But what do you mean by COVID mandates, and what are we talking about here?
So I use the general phrase COVID mandates to cover everything from mask mandates to lockdowns to no jab, no job policies, vaccine mandates, anything where the state is involved to coerce a person's consent. Now, Article 6 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics states very specifically that consent must be granted by the individual and can be withheld for any reason. And if it's withheld, there should be no negative repercussion, I'm paraphrasing, of withholding said consent. Now, forgive me, but sacking somebody is a negative repercussion, and therefore saying to somebody that if you don't get injected by any substance, good for you or bad for you, that's not my issue. I'm talking about principles, civil liberties. That if the state says to any individual, if you don't get injected by this particular substance that I'm telling you is good for you, you will lose your job, that's coercion. And I believe that's a crime against humanity, as has been already encoded and enshrined in our culture, in our history, in our traditions.
Why do you think we've arrived at this point? Because we are in new territory, aren't we?
Yeah. Now, let me first of all state for the record, I'm double jabbed. And for me, it's not about the vaccines per se. It's a debate as a broadcaster I had gotten involved with as a reporting on the latest developments on the jab, the science, the evidence, the efficacy. But I'm not a scientist, so I don't speak about the vaccines. I speak about the mandates and about consent and what that means. Now, in answer to your question, why I think we've ended up in this situation, I believe we're in a bit of a moment, such as the moment that historically we experienced with the invention of the Gutenberg press and the 30 Years' War. The internet has democratized access to information. The state, though it still, as we see in Canada, has a monopoly on violence, it no longer has a monopoly on the narrative and on information. And even if you think prior to the internet, with the advent of the printing press and books, that was an example of the state losing a monopoly on, for example, access to the Bible. And in those days, the church and the state represented the same thing. Now, today, that effect has played out with access to the internet. So there was a narrative that we were being told to believe, and claims were made at the beginning of this health crisis, such as President Biden saying that if you get vaccinated, you will not catch COVID. He's on the record saying that. So there was a narrative, and that was the state narrative. And what's happened is that people refused to stop questioning. People refused to stop holding power to account and began speaking to each other online. And that's disrupted traditional power hierarchies, a bit like the printing press did. And what that does with that disruption is it causes unease and it causes tension and conflict. We're in that moment right now, and the state is struggling against its own people to define the narrative, in other words, to define reality.
Tom, that's a very interesting point, isn't it? That the internet, the presence of the internet has simultaneously enabled governments to do things which hitherto would have been impossible, but it has also paradoxically given us as a general population that ability to look for our own information and not just take for granted what's coming down from the top. It has put us in a very interesting liminal zone, hasn't it?
Because we live in an age where we have active citizenship. Not everyone chooses, by the way, to take up that active citizenship, but I'm more positive about these things because, yes, we can look at the authoritarianism in Canada, but people are fighting back. People are demanding their rights. In this country, we had the Chartists, we had the suffragettes. There's been
but
more
now
modern...
what's happening is you're having the government with the likes of Facebook and Twitter trying to clamp down on anything that doesn't fit their political narrative,
but they're
the online harms and all of that.
Yeah, but the point is they're not completely getting away with it. Why is it that England, and I say specifically here England because I think in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland we have seen more aggression, as it were, towards these types of mandates. Why is it here in England, compared to the rest of Europe, we have relatively less restrictions? That doesn't mean so we haven't had lockdowns, we haven't had some pretty ghastly things have happened. But it's because I think we have a citizenry armed with information that is prepared to push back.
I agree. I'd agree. Our
government.
resistance here to these mandates was, in England particularly, was quite strong. But I also agree with this point. I think that the big tech giants are attempting, in particular with the Biden regime, to silence dissenting voices.
Yeah.
I'm suffocated on Instagram. If you try and follow me on Instagram, a warning comes up and says I spread disinformation. I'm suffocated on Twitter. The online harms bill is problematic, and the Times reported that our government wants to criminalise COVID disinformation with prison time. And the problem here, of course, is as we all now have been following this for the last 2 years, something that was yesterday's disinformation became today's preponderant theory. And this is one of the reasons why there was a backlash against my own broadcasting. I was early on speaking about the lab leak in Wuhan, and at the time, people were called conspiracy theorists for speaking about that. Today, that is the preponderant theory.
Why do you think it has been different here? I think there's no denying what Tom's saying. We have held on to more freedom. It's been severely impacted and restricted for sure, but there has been some kind of determination to retain freedom that seems to be holding something of a line. From the point of view of the people, against what is coming down from the government.
It would be hard to put one reason on this, but I do think it's a combination of, history and the nature of what it meant in England to break away, for example, during the Henry VIII's breaking away from the Catholic Church, this fiercely independent, we will stand on our own, set up our own church. There's that history there, which I believe matters more than most people give credit to. In addition, there was a fierce people's resistance to these mandates. In addition to that, this country has this, again, historical point of having resisted Nazi Germany, despising fascism and actually having learned the lessons of fascism in a way that because Churchill was standing up until the last moment before the Americans joined in against totalitarianism, there's a particular culture, that the perfect storm, if you like, that came together in England that didn't even actually come together in Wales and Scotland. We had more left-wing governments. Until this day, we have that going on there.
Do you think there are ever, could you imagine even hypothetically, circumstances where our freedoms should be restricted in the way that they have been for the greater good?
Well,
you see that even hypothetically?
See, that's an interesting hypothetical question, and it requires the equally hypothetical threat of something that would either kill us all unless we did it together or not. And COVID simply wasn't an example of that. That's like people during the war on terror. I was quite active, speaking both against the excesses of the war on terror and also against extremism coming from our own community, Muslim community. Now, people used to pose a similar hypothetical to me about the ticking time bomb theory. Is it okay to torture a suspect if you know that they know that there's a bomb going off tomorrow and they won't tell you where? Can you kind of, like a 24, what's that show, 24? Jack Bauer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jack Bauer's
are there limits on state power? Yeah.
And so, again, in that very hypothetical example, you bring it to the real world. Imagine I'm the officer that did that, and now I have to justify myself in the real world. In the real world, there still will need to be a third party that asks me, upon what evidence did I do that? And how could I prove that I knew that person already knew where the bomb was in the first place? And once you start bringing in other people, it becomes a lot less morally ambiguous. You start realizing that actually it's very difficult even to prove that this person definitely knows where a bomb is. So you'll always end up jumping the shark. I believe it's a slippery slope. We've got to be very careful about precedents that are set.
So do you think that in this instance, the government has used the wrong opportunity, which is to say COVID, to try and restructure the relationship between the state and the people?
100%. And the last time they tried this was during the War on Terror, with Blair's attempt to introduce identity cards. He's now trying again with digital ID, using COVID vaccine passports as an excuse. It's the age-old, anyone who enjoys Star Wars, for example, watch the episode 3 in the prequels with Emperor Palpatine becoming Senator Palpatine becoming Emperor Palpatine, the kind of palace coup, the domestic takeover without the need for violence by taking over from within, right? Now, there are some people among us who attempt to use every emergency to accrue more power for the state. And the problem, of course, is if we, the people, allow the state to usurp our rights during an emergency, the state has an incentive to create an emergency to usurp our rights. And that, I believe, is the missing piece of the jigsaw. When we look at everything that's happened over the last 2 years, and everything we've said turned out true, right? And the state, everything they said turned out wrong. The research is there now, whether it's mask mandates, lockdowns, vaccine mandates. None of that worked the way they said it was going to work. Let's put it that way, right? That's me being reasonable. None of it worked the way they told us it was going to work. And so when we ask, where is the disinformation really coming from? And why is it coming? I'm happy that England retreated from those positions, looked to Canada, New Zealand and Australia to see what could have been if we didn't retreat. And now we have a duty, just as we did in the past, to make sure that we don't abandon the people of Canada, Australia and New Zealand and make sure we show them solidarity.
That's a good point as well, isn't it, Emily? I mean, have we, do you think, by whatever it is that we've been doing as people, by protesting and by flagging up what we think is going on and sharing this information, have we stopped this in its tracks? Or should we be looking to Canada and New Zealand and Australia and continuing to think if it's happened there, it could happen here? Or have we held it back?
I mean, I hope that we've held it back. I mean, we don't know if there's going to be another variant that crops up and then suddenly we hear the same justifications for the curtailment of our civil liberties. I mean, it's a very difficult one. We've seen just how much the government were able to shift the goalposts time and time again. We never thought we'd go back into lockdown, and there we were before Christmas, suddenly all hunkered down again. So it's really hard to predict the future, but we've got to, as you say, show some solidarity with those in Canada, with those in Australia, with those in New Zealand, who are still under the most ridiculous governments and tyranny in some ways.
Tom, why do you think it is that we're watching what's happening, or we're seeing, or if we choose to, we can see what's happening in Canada, for example. We can also see what's happening in Australia and in New Zealand. And yet Boris Johnson takes an opportunity to stand up and talk about the challenges and the threat to life facing the people of Ukraine, without making even a passing reference to say anything condemnatory about what is happening in Canada. How do we interpret that absence of comment from our leaders?
Oh, yeah, we talked about this earlier in terms of, I think, just the political hypocrisy, but I just want to come back to a point, and actually I very rarely leap to the defence of Boris Johnson, but he got it right in terms of this latest lockdown. He didn't go for the Omicron lockdown over Christmas, and I think one of the reasons for that, and again, call me naive, but I've got a lot of faith in our parliamentary system. We wouldn't see a Canada here, we wouldn't see a New Zealand, for the simple reason that, as we saw with the Brexit vote in 2016, there's always been a faction in Parliament, whether it's the Spartans over Brexit or actually Boris Johnson's own backbenchers, that are able to put him on notice that if he tried to push through another lockdown, another cancellation of Christmas, then he wouldn't be in the job that he's in now. And I think that's something quite, again, it's a British phenomenon, I think.
Credit where credit is due. I believe that a lot of the vitriol he's now facing is because he pulled back from this agenda. And I believe that if you look to Keir Starmer's position, it's been unwavering. He's always been in support of further and harsher measures. And of course, that carries influence. The Labour Party influences our culture. So credit where it's due. I would say that it does alarm me. If you think back to Hong Kong and how our media was all over that, right? That's what Trudeau is doing. It alarms me that mainstream media, what I'm calling these days corporatist legacy media, obviously this particular station is an exception to what we know mainstream media depicts, and they were all over Hong Kong, and they are woefully silent about Canada, and there have been since the truckers began. And there were attempts to paint some of those truckers as far-right extremists, encouraged by Trudeau. In fact, there's a Canada Broadcasting Corporation media article saying that the far-right love the word freedom. And you think, is that what we've come to? That the word freedom is now seen as a far right.
Pejorative.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So I do think I encourage our Prime Minister to show solidarity like we did to Hong Kong, and yes, to the people of Ukraine, minus the Azov Brigade, but like we did with Hong Kong, to show some solidarity to the people in Canada. But this brings us back to the narrative. I don't believe that with the way in which the state has monopolised the narrative, it's no longer possible to pretend that things aren't happening when we can all see them happening. I mean, because of this big tech censorship stuff, I've joined a platform. I'm in collaboration with Getter now, and I believe their CEO, Jason Miller, will be on your show in a minute. And because it's a free speech platform, I'm very, very concerned about the way they try and censor people like us who are attempting to raise the alarm online.
And what will you be doing? I think of Getter as a just a means to share, short messages, between people who are aware of our existence, but you must have other things.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that for reasons that I can't explain for legal reasons on this show, it's no secret that I lost my broadcasting role over these sorts of conversations, right? And at LBC. So I can't go into the details there. I have announced that I've sent a legal letter to them. But, what I'll be looking to do going forward is I have a Substack where my writing goes up, and I'll be trying to host a video platform show on an alternative to YouTube called Odyssey, where I'll be basically uploading video podcasts. And it's a decentralized platform, so the videos can't be taken down. And then on Getter, I'll be putting up live streams to comment. And the three I'll be using to comment on what I believe is increasing authoritarianism coming from the state, whether it's the online harms bill, the policing bill, the human rights bill. If we look at the COVID emergency laws that we've put in place, they need to go. The state is accruing more and more power, and I believe just at the time where what we should be doing is retreating as a state from the people and allowing people to be. And that was the mistake. You see, the 30 Years' War after the printing press and the Gutenberg press was invented, the state needs to be very careful here because it's at a crossroads. We stand at a crossroads between human liberty and technocratic tyranny. And of course, there's a power out there, a rising superpower, that would love for us to adopt their way of doing things, their culture, and that is China. And I believe we should jealously guard our own culture.
Maajid has mentioned LBC. And so I'm obligated to turn to a statement from them that they released following Maajid's departure from the station. And I quote, Maajid Nawaz's contract with LBC is up very shortly, and following discussions with him, Maajid will no longer present a show on LBC with immediate effect. We thank Maajid for the contribution he has made to LBC and wish him well. I'm obliged to read that. Maajid, thank you so much for being with us. I think we all are. There were so many heads nodding there. We were all nodding with the idea that for whatever is the outcome, we do stand at a crossroads, I think. Yeah. Something different is happening, and I think it's beholden upon us all simply to be aware, so that we can't look back in years' time and say, well, it passed me by.
Absolutely.
It's important to have that conversation and to be aware. So thank you very much for coming in and sharing that with us, Maajid. Now, on the show, we often change direction very abruptly and go in pursuit of stories that are unconnected to anything that has gone before. And here we are. I'm at one of those crossroads in this moment. Four lions were rescued from what were described as appalling conditions in a circus in France. And they've arrived now at a wildlife sanctuary in South Africa following an appeal for funds. The Born Free Foundation, which campaigns to keep wild animals in their natural habitat, says the 3 females and 1 male were born into captivity and spent years on the move with various French circuses. It's a familiar story. I think we've all heard this kind of plight for these magnificent animals before. Joining us now is Amanda Poole-Connor from the Born Free Foundation, which rescued the lions and released them back into the wild. Thank you so much for joining me. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Now, we've spoken to colleagues of yours at the Born Free Foundation. I've made it a personal mission of mine to keep a light on the plight of the wild and particularly the big cats. So tell us, if you will, where were these lions and in what conditions were they living when you intervened?
Well, these 4 adult lions have had a heartbreaking life in a French circus, separated from their mother when they were, months old, and spent decades, over a decade, travelling around in cramped beach wagons where they lived, slept, ate, defecated. You know, I mean, not a nice life. The only time let out would have been to perform demeaning tricks for obeying crowds. So one of the lions, the male Luger, a very large lion because he was castrated very early, he turned on the circus owner, attacked him. So the circus owner, to his credit, rather than selling them to another circus, decided he wanted to send them to a sanctuary. And our amazing friends at Tonga d'Atoile in France, a rescue centre, took them in. And that was supposed to be, you know, a small part of their journey. They reached out to Born Free, and of course we offered them sanctuary at our big cat sanctuary at Shamwari in South Africa. And you say it was a bit of a segue from your last story into this one, but these are our lines of lockdown, because that move was supposed to happen in April 2020. All the paperwork had been done, everything was set up, the funds had been raised by the amazing Born Free supporters, and of course we know what happened in March. So these poor lions have been waiting at this halfway house, expertly looked after, but it's not the same as a big cat sanctuary in South Africa in their native homeland. So waiting they've been, our lines of lockdown, but finally, as restrictions lifted, we got them to their homeland.
I can only imagine, though, in those additional 2 years, you had time with them. And my thoughts are immediately, what do you do with animals that have lived the kind of lives that they did, that completely artificial, dislocated from lion reality? How do you prepare them for what was about to happen to them, which is to say, going back into the world?
Well, I mean, they were supposed to be at Tonga for a short period of time, and actually they needed some rehabilitation. They needed to get their fitness up. You know, obviously being in a cramped cage for long periods of time, they weren't fit. So they were getting healthy. And actually being there for longer meant that when they did arrive at our sanctuary, and you can see the pictures of them leaping out into the beautiful enclosure that we've got at Shamwari, they were actually healthier than they might have been had they come straight to us. But it's about healthcare and really just taking them away from exhibition, you know, and giving them what we've given them now in our sanctuary in South Africa, a life free from exploitation and exhibition. And they're still playing a really important role as in education, because out in Shamwari we do have local school children who can come, local communities, and learn about the vital role that lions play in ecosystems and about, you know, the lives that these lions have lived in captivity. And that education is a really important part of, you know, the conservation work that Born Free and other organisations do. But yeah, the real journey has begun now, in that they're in the sanctuary. They've had a wonderful first week there with a lot of sleep in the shade. But as you can imagine, you know, being on African soil, their ancestral homeland with trees and grass and the smells and sights and sounds and the African sun, you know, they've got a beautiful life ahead of them. But that's the start of Born Free's journey with them, because they need lifetime care. And these lions, with our protection, could live 5-10 years. And it costs over £4,000 a year per lion for Born Free to give them expert lifetime care. So we do urge anyone listening who really does care for lions, would like to see these big cats have a magnificent future as they deserve in their forever home, to visit bornfree.org.uk. You can find out more about each lion. We've got videos of them. We'll be updating all the time. And of course, anyone can dig deep and make a donation. We'd be so grateful, and so would the lions.
Will they be able to form relationships with others of their kind? I mean, I'm imagining that these four probably thought that the only other lions in the universe were the other three. How will they adapt to the presence of the rest?
Yeah, they're in a sanctuary, so they are in an enclosure. I mean, it's 3 acres. It's bigger than anything they've ever known, and it's the best thing we can give them, next best thing to the wild, because they wouldn't survive in the wild having been raised in captivity. They can hear the other lions. We've taken over 50 big cats out to Shamwari in the 25 years we've been working with Shamwari. And, you know, there are other lions, king and so on around. They'll be able to hear them and smell them. And we hope that over time, you know, some of the lions really do create much more of a wild nature as they adapt to their life there and they hear the sounds. But yeah, the four of them have got a close bond. The male spends more time away from the females. He likes the peace and quiet. He likes the shade. And of course, male lions sleep up to 20 hours a day. The females a little bit less. So they tend to hang out together. And then Luger comes and checks on them every now and again and makes sure they're okay. But they're settling in absolutely magnificently. We couldn't be happier. And to have a good news story with everything else that's going on in the world, it's such a joy.
I couldn't agree more. How many other lions are in circumstances of the sort that your four were in circuses or similar?
I mean, we don't know across the world. I mean, in the UK, circuses have been banned for a couple of years now, thanks to the hard work of organisations like Born Free and some of our other colleague NGOs. It's not that long ago that they were banned. Can you believe it? I mean, really, only a few years ago, we had wild animals in circuses in the UK. But that's no longer the case here. In November, France announced that they would be placing a ban on the use of wild animals in circuses. But I think there's been a real change in perceptions from the public on, this exploitation of wild animals for our entertainment. It just feels so wrong now. Feels archaic. It feels like it belongs in the Victorian times, along, obviously, as Born Free thinks, with zoos. But yeah, that exploitation, the public really are shifting. And that's where Born Free will continue to work and campaign at the highest possible policy level to ensure that these bans, become worldwide, and that no longer will animals like these four have to suffer like that in captivity.
Amanda Poole-Connor from the Born Free Foundation, that is such an uplifting story, and the pictures of them, somehow they do look like cats that have had a tough time. There's something in their golden eyes that suggests that they've been through the mill, and it's so uplifting to hear.
Now they've got the sunshine on their faces, and as Virginia McKenna says, there's nothing like for a wild animal to be in its natural habitat and have that African sun on their face. So we wish them a long and healthy life in our sanctuary.
And so we do. Amanda Poole-Connor, 1,000 thanks. Lovely story.
Thank you.
After the break, the Canada trucker protest. 100 arrests and 21 vehicles towed away so far as police tried to break the Ottawa truck protesters. But is their right to protest being denied? More of all of that after the break.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking a little drier and calmer, but only for a short while. Let's take a look at the details. Cloud will already begin to increase across southwest England this evening, with outbreaks of rain developing, winds easing for a few hours. Mild this evening with temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius. It will be drier this evening across the southeast and London, with the winds easing too, temperatures falling away over the coming hours. Over to Wales, and after a quiet few hours, cloud and rain will begin to move back in from the west. Winds will also increase. Turning chilly for a time this evening across the Midlands, with clear skies over Birmingham. Winds will fall light ahead of more unsettled weather moving in tonight. Temperatures hovering around 4 degrees Celsius. Any lingering rain, sleet and snow will soon clear away from northern England to leave a dry evening. Temperatures tumbling with some patchy frost and ice forming ahead of further rain tonight. Frost and ice also for a time across eastern Scotland, whilst in the west we could see cloud and rain beginning to move in from the Atlantic. Winds also increasing along the coasts. Turning increasingly wet across Northern Ireland this evening, with Belfast holding on to the driest weather for longest. Winds increasing from the west too, but staying on the mild side. Wet and windy weather with then sweep across the whole country as we go through tonight. Gales developing by morning, and that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Police in Ottawa have detained 2 leaders of the Canadian trucker convoy as they move to break up the protests against the nation's COVID rules. Police were acting as part of the Emergencies Act, which was invoked by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday. Amongst other things, it imposes bans on public assembly in some areas. But is this an infringement of the truckers' right to protest? Is this a way of controlling state narratives so that unless you agree with the government, it will take action to stifle your viewpoint? Joining me in the studio now is Jason Miller. Hello, Jason, the CEO of social media platform Getter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is obviously, you may know that this has been a subject that I have followed with passionate interest from the beginning. I'm assuming that you too support the truckers' protests, or at the very least, their right to protest.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's important to keep in mind why this protest is even happening, because these government controls that are going into place, even as the science has clearly shown that it's time to move on from some of the mandates, that now people are being held back to the previous standards. And as certain provinces in Canada, I believe it was Alberta and Saskatchewan, started to relax certain things with regard to the passports and some of the mandates, at the federal level, they were keeping many of those controls in place. And I think Justin Trudeau has really turned a blind eye to people initially, but then now he's starting to use this Emergency Act and the authoritarian force to go and actually suppress them. And it's real dangerous to see all these free speech rights being taken away.
Why though? You know, I would have thought in my naivety that it would have been great for a leader to say, it's behind us now, and we can look forward to the sunlit uplands and kind of ride the wave of popular enthusiasm that would have then ensued. Why would a Prime Minister decide, in the face of evidence, as you suggest, that the pandemic was on the wane, to tighten the screws? What's the motivation, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think many politicians, not just in Canada, we've seen it in the United States, we've certainly seen it in the UK and other countries, have become drunk with power, so to speak, where they've seen the ability to shut down economies. Australia, which is essentially one big, massive lockdown, they're slowly starting to relax on some of it, but they've seen where they can go and constrict any aspect of movement, of free speech. And so now, anytime there's dissent or debate, just as Maajid said in the last segment, governments now feel empowered to come in and say, it's our way, or we're going to go ahead and lock you up.
It seems so out of context, though, because as I understand it, 90% of the cross-border truckers are vaccinated, which invites a person to say, realistically, what more could be done? You know, the people have done what was asked of them. Why not let it go?
Well, and that's because I think that there's this worldview that many of the leaders have in the Western world where it has to be their way, that the only way that people can survive is if they have these lockdowns or continued mandates. They don't want to admit that they may have been wrong. In fact, in the United States, we have Dr. Anthony Fauci, which how often is Dr. Fauci wrong? It depends on how many days in the week there are. He's consistently proven wrong. I remember when he said at one point you had to wear 1 mask, then 2 masks, then no mask. Now, I don't even know how many masks we're back to in the United States now. But so many leaders don't want to admit that they're wrong or that science has proven that it's time to amend the policies.
What do you make of it, Tom, when you hear that? You know, what do you think is the likely next step for Canada? If you could look into the future, what would you imagine is happening?
Point, I thought it was very powerful. We've got, unfortunately, leaders in the Western world and elsewhere, of course, who don't like to be proven wrong. You know, the whole point of leadership, certainly political leadership in the past, has been about those leaders like Gandhi, for example, having that wonderful sense of humility, being able to bring people together, being able to address grievance and other points of view that he or she may not necessarily agree with. And we seem to have lost that sort of sense of civility in our body politic. And you have, and maybe there's a connection to this with Trudeau, who, let's be honest, hadn't really particularly had, other than his own father's fame, a particularly great hinterland of experience in leadership, in community politics. Gets into the prime ministerial post, and this is about his own, his own personality.
If it's a government's obligation, amongst its obligations, to uphold the rule of law, is there any, would it be possible to suggest that Trudeau and the government in Canada have justification that laws are being breached, and that he and they are merely upholding the law? Could that argument be made, or have the Canadian truckers been operating within the law?
So there's always going to be that push and pull when it comes to free speech and demonstrations. We certainly did not see Trudeau doing that in 2020 when he was showing up to the Black Lives Matter rallies and taking a knee. And certainly we saw the horrific images that have come out of Ottawa over the last 24 hours with the police on horseback who trampled over people who were there peacefully protesting, including one elderly woman, which we're still trying to get the details on what kind of condition she's in. But these are pretty scary images. These are not quite at the level of a Tiananmen Square. Obviously, a trooper on horse is a little different than a tank. But for this generation, this might be the closest that we're coming.
Do you get a sense of how the truckers' protest is being received in wider Canada? Are the people of Canada for them or against them?
Well, people in Canada, there's a very strong support base. It's interesting to watch the mainstream media, though, the left or center media, whether it be the Globe and Mail or the Globe and Mail, as some might call it.
I'm not really talking about how the media is presenting it. I'm wondering what on the ground, are the truckers supported by Canadians or opposed by Canadians?
Anecdotally, I've seen strong support. I've only seen polling domestically in the United States, which shows about 55% support for the truckers.
It's fascinating. Jason Miller, CEO of Getter, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for your time. I have to move on. TV presenter Ray Mears will be joining us presently. I think he's actually in the thick of Storm Eunice, even as we speak. It's crashed through many parts of the UK. Its after effects are still being felt. High winds have caused trees to fall and damage to properties, and 4 people have died. Ray will be joining me now. I think if the technology is holding up, he's joining us by phone. I'm being told he is joining us by phone because you're in the thick of a power cut at home. Ray, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Neil. I can hear you. I can't see you. I'd like to see you.
Bring us up to date, Ray. What happened? What happened to you, courtesy of Storm Eunice?
Well, I live out in the rural Sussex, where we have frequent power cuts when there are high winds. The trees knock the lines down, but of course, Storm Eunice has done its worst. It's gone through. It's knocked a lot of big trees down, and there's a huge power cut in this area. It started about 12:30 yesterday, and my thoughts are with the guys out in the dark now trying to fix it. I've seen them at work. They do a brilliant job. But they've really got a big task on their hands now.
Ray, I'm understanding that this is the worst storm in 80 years. I'm sure there will be other ways in which it's being classified, but any indication, from the point of view of a man who spent so much time in the wilds and out amongst the elements, why we would see a storm of this severity at this time?
I think it's not unusual every 20 years or so for there to be a storm like this. The question we need to ask is, will we see more of them? And everywhere I seem to... Just 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a reindeer herder in Lapland, and he was describing the chaotic climate that they're experiencing and said, this is the new normal. It's what we have to adapt to. So I suspect that what we're witnessing is, this is vestiges associated with global warming.
What do you think of the approach that was taken this time? I certainly noticed that the government taking it upon itself to tell us all to stay at home. I've heard warnings in the past to be careful, but this suggestion that we stay at home regardless.
Well,
how do you are we moving into the time of weather lockdowns?
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I think that this time we had lots of warning that this was coming, which was brilliant. Because if you're sensible, you take you make some preparations. I actually went out yesterday at the height of the storm, and I spend my life in woodland. It was terrifying. There were bits of trees breaking, falling out of the forest. It was very dangerous. I think it's sensible for people to stay in and during the worst of the storm, but I think perhaps that message needs to be tempered with, look out for yourself and help your neighbours, because there are some people who just give up when there's a storm, and there are others who, roll their sleeves up and get on with it. And certainly around here, all credit to the local farmers who went out with their chainsaws and on their own back cleared some of the roads. So I think it's sensible to say to people that this is really dangerous. But at the same time, we need to encourage people to be British and, be tough and resilient.
But you're very much about resilience, about self-reliance. I can imagine that you've had long experience of judging risk for yourself. I wonder and I worry if there isn't a danger of infantilizing people and making them forget their own responsibility to take responsibility and take charge of their own lives.
I agree with that.
Shouldn't it be more about telling people how to cope?
Yeah, they do need to know how to do those things. And if you protect people from risk, then they lose the ability to judge it for themselves. However, at the same time, there's the difficulty of how do you explain to people that this storm is beyond the norm? And that's certainly what was the case here. I think if this had come in October, like the last big storm we had like this in 87, the damage would have been much worse, because the trees, if you remember, in 87 still had their leaves on them, and the ground was very wet. So we've been saved that. But, it's a very difficult line, I think, for the authorities to tread. But I do think that the warning that was given was good, and it came early. We weren't surprised by it. And that's the most important thing of all. So, I think the weathermen got it right this time.
Interesting stuff there, Ray. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that all traditional power, light, heat and the rest are returned to you forthwith. But thank you for making time for us in extremis. After the break, find out why a former 80s pop star, Jay Aston of Bucks Fizz fame, has made her mind up to campaign for the health of trees.
GBNews is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Ash dieback has been described as a catastrophe for nature by the National Trust. They say that our landscapes and woodlands are irrevocably changing before our eyes. The disease is triggered by a fungus, and in less than a decade it has spread to all parts of Britain and has affected hundreds of thousands of ash trees, if indeed not millions of ash trees. Joining me to cast more light on this troubling story is former Bucks Fizz singer, now member of The Fizz, as well as campaigner to highlight the dangers of ash dieback disease, Jay Aston. Hello, Jay.
Hi there.
As someone who vividly remembers your career, it's terribly exciting for me to be talking to you and having you join me this evening. I'm very pleased. But I must get to things serious. How on earth, why are you involved with this, with raising awareness of this disease that's afflicting our trees?
Yeah, well, it's really like an epidemic going all over the country, and I just don't think people know about it. There's just not enough awareness for people who might have an ash tree in their garden, or at the end of the road, or in the park when you're walking the kids. And this is everywhere. We have, ash is the biggest tree. We have more ash in this country than any other tree. And it started in the southeast. We don't really know how it came in. But first of all, I noticed there were lots of boughs falling on the road as I was driving my daughter to school. And then I had 2 or 3 trees, because I've actually got quite a big garden. I've got some woodland at the back behind my house. And I noticed the trees looked a bit dodgy, like they had a really bad haircut. And then the next year there was 4, and then there was 6, and then there was 8. So I had to get people in to have a look at them, because I thought this didn't look right. And then I realised they had ash dieback, and I had several of them felled. I had to go to the Forestry Commission, which takes about a year for that to go through. Meanwhile, you've got a dangerous tree, at the back of your house. And it's just really to tell people to just, if they've got an ash tree in the back of their garden, to have a look. There just doesn't seem to be any kind of campaign or anything that local councils can do. I know they've had their budgets cut forever. With the pandemic, there were several trees that came down near me, and I just couldn't even get anyone to answer the phone. They were obviously not in the offices. And so it's just something I want to raise awareness of.
Is there anything that can be done? I said in my introduction that it's affecting already hundreds of thousands of ash trees all over Britain, possibly millions of trees. Is there a cure? Is there a therapy for the trees?
Well, sadly not. All you can do to begin with is cut out any boughs that look like they're leaning. But essentially, the tree will die and out all the branches. Sometimes they
losing.
I think we're really fine, and yet if you back and all the way through. So
I think we're just starting to lose you there, Jay. We're losing you there. Emily, if I can come to you, this is something we've heard about before, isn't it? The Dutch elm disease. I remember, being an affliction that happened during an earlier part of my life. Ash dieback. I mean, it's an awful idea to think of our landscape being so radically altered as it would be if we were to lose all of these trees.
Well, yes. I mean, I can't say I know a lot about trees myself, but I do know how beautiful they are, and they'd be sorely missed where I live, but also when I visit parts of the countryside, parts of our green landscape, when I go up to Scotland. And during these storms, I think we've lost a lot of trees. I don't know how many, but quite a few near me.
It would be shattering, wouldn't it? I mean, I know over thousands of years, we've harvested so much of our natural forest. We cut down all the oak trees to build the ships of Nelson's Navy and all the rest of it. But I still think of ours as a tree laden, a tree-rich country, and to think of losing an entire species and to lose the ash would be devastating.
I think less than 12% of the British Isles is actually built on. So, we are still, we've lost a lot of those ancient forests. But I think it comes down to two things, Neil. I mean, education. We know about Dutch elm disease because I think there was a big effort to educate people about not having these huge sort of wood piles, for example, in your back garden that could attract the beetles that then went off and infected the trees. Likewise, I think in the school curriculum that is taught. So, I mean, it's really depressing to hear that there's no cure for these ash trees, but I do think we need to get the education right, but also with the Dutch elm preservation areas where local authorities have a key role to play as well.
I think we've got Jay back with us. Are you still there, Jay?
I am. Sorry, what went wrong.
You've rejoined us. It's a heartbreaking thought, isn't it, to imagine our landscape that's so defined, by the trees that we have. To imagine losing a member of the family, such as the ash, is too much to contemplate, surely.
I think it's really sad, and that's the thing, is it's so typically English. We're known for our green countryside and our trees. And we all know that trees are a huge part of a plus for the environment. But it's dangerous. And I just want to really make people aware of it because there doesn't seem to be enough happening about it. And obviously the storm has raised awareness today and yesterday. A tree came down right in front of a bus up in Bigham Hill. And very, very dangerous. So, just urge people to take care. Maybe, Google it, have a look. And if you've got a problem, obviously you need to speak to council.
Jay Aston, Bucks Fizz legend, thank you so much for joining us. And it's a story so dear to my heart. The thought of anything further happening to the irreplaceable landscape of Britain, too much to contemplate. But Tom, it's a reminder, isn't it, that what we have is not forever, or not necessarily, and that we need to be aware while it's still with us.
We do, which is why we need to put conservation at the heart of the curriculum. I'll finish on that point.
Yeah.
It's true. We always talk about climate change and net zero targets and what the government can do for that. But surely environmentalism has to start on that smaller scale, looking after what we have around us, not littering, looking after our trees, looking after our wildlife first.
Thank you so much, both of you. Tom, Emily, it's always lovely to have you. Thanks so much for being with me. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. Nana Akwe is up next with Tonight Live. I'll be back with more conversation and more debate next week. But thank you so much for your time this evening, and I will see you in 7 days' time.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking a little drier and calmer, but only for a short while. Let's take a look at the details. Cloud will already begin to increase across southwest England this evening, with outbreaks of rain developing, winds easing for a few hours. Mild this evening with temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius. It will be drier this evening across the southeast and London, with the winds easing too, temperatures falling away over the coming hours. Over to Wales, and after a quiet few hours, cloud and rain will begin to move back in from the west. Winds will also increase. Turning chilly for a time this evening across the Midlands, with clear skies over Birmingham. Winds will fall light ahead of more unsettled weather moving in tonight. Temperatures hovering around 4 degrees Celsius. Any lingering rain, sleet and snow will soon clear away from northern England to leave a dry evening. Temperatures tumbling, with some patchy frost and ice forming ahead of further rain tonight. Frost and ice also for a time across eastern Scotland, whilst in the west we could see cloud and rain beginning to move in from the Atlantic.